Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Staffing and Appeals Committee for the 5th of March. Can I ask, I apologise the meeting has started late, but we have had to wait until the previous meeting was finished and there was obviously a lot to discuss. We are quorate. So we will kick off. Can I ask initially that everyone present turns off their mobile phones and puts them to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? And there is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. So if the alarm sounds, I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll make our way downstairs out of the main entrance and turn left. The muster point is at the far end of the building. So first of all, could you report any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Hunt and from Councillor Nafsing and Councillor Coates is substituting.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask if any member would like to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no hands, so I'm taking that as no one having anything to declare. So first off, we're asked to approve the minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 31st of January, as being a correct record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal, please raise your hand? No, thank you very much. I will take that as approved as a correct record. And on that basis, we're happy to approve the minutes as written. So let's come on to the first substantive item on the agenda, please. Can I ask the HR Policy Manager to introduce the report?
Hello, good afternoon. So this report is the Senior Manager Pay Data that we're presenting today. So this is an annual reporting requirement that arises from the Local Government Transparency Code 2015. And the data that you've been provided with and the report covers a reporting period of the 1st of December 2022 to the 30th of November 2023. You've had two sets of data that sit alongside this report, which I'll briefly outline now. So the first of those is the tier 1 to 3 data. So that looks at the full-time equivalent salaries of the top 3 tiers of our organisational structure. This is shown in salary bands of £5,000, apart from posts which are paid over 150,000, where we've given an actual salary figure for those individuals, and that applies to 7 posts, which are detailed in the report. There's 36 posts in our tier 1 to 3 structure, which is very similar to the previous reporting period where there was 37. The most notable difference, which I wanted to draw your attention to, is the number of shared posts we have in that organisational structure. There's 36 of those shared, 21. There were 21 shared posts in the previous year, mostly with Peterborough City Council, and that's reduced to 4 shared posts this year, and those are within public health, and that reflects the decisions that have been taken by members and by the organisation to decouple that structure from Peterborough City Council. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next set of data. That is the over 50,000 data. So this is slightly different in that it looks at total remuneration that has been received. So it's taken from actual pay data from our payroll reports rather than the FTE salaries of those roles. So that's made up of people's basic pay and any additional elements, and looks at a total of those. We have 260 officers who have total remuneration over 50k. This has increased year on year. So it is an increase from the previous year. And it's important to note that the 50k reporting threshold has remained the same since 2015. So whereas we've had cost of living increases that have applied to our salaries, that reporting threshold has remained static at 50k since 2015, which does mean that more people fall above that salary cut-off point, that reporting point, each time we undertake this exercise, because of the increases, the cost of living increases that apply to our salaries. Wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there are now more people that have a base salary that's lower than 50k included in this data set, and they go over that threshold because of the additional elements of pay that they receive. So that applies to 23 officers, and the majority of those are in the social care roles. Finally, I'm going to move on to the other document that's included, which is the Chief Officer Pay Policy Statement. So it's a requirement of the Localism Act 2011 for us to publish this externally each year. So it's hosted on our external website. We haven't made any change to the policy, the substance of the policy approach here. The update is to section 5, which details our pay multiple. So this is the ratio of the chief executive's salary compared to the median salary of the organisation. So the midpoint of all salaries. Our ratio this year is 1 to 6.8. There isn't a target ratio for the public sector. I know that's been something that's been discussed in previous years, but there isn't a target ratio to aim for. But what we've looked at is benchmarking our ratio with other local authorities. So the ones we've looked at are Hertfordshire County Council, which has exactly the same ratio as us, of 1 to 6.8. And we've also looked at Essex County Council, which has a similar figure of 1 to 6.5. So to sort of give a little bit of an external comparison. In terms of next steps, so the report will next go to full council in March, which is a requirement to have that approved in March for publication from April. I appreciate that's a quick sort of whiz through the information that you've had. Very much welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation is to ask that this be presented to the full council in March. So with that in mind, can we have questions or debate? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chairman. Please excuse my voice. I'm a little bit hoarse still. Yeah, I know this is a requirement by law that we have to present this, and I know every council has to do it. I feel that there'll be members of the public watching who will think that because this is on the agenda, we actually have some power over it. And I think it's important to express that we really don't, that we report this so that people can see how it compares to other councils. But if this council were to say, if this committee were to say, we think that's too much or too little or anything like that, we would have no power to change it because it's all bound by strict laws and by what. And HR, I think, would have taken issue with some comments if it were made like that. So it almost feels to me like every time I hear it on every council, not just this one, it feels like a pointless agenda item because it gives us no power to change whichever way we felt we might want to. And I worry sometimes that it almost looks like we're endorsing everything that happens when in fact some of these things we have no power over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Batchelor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the table. So in the scale, under some of the minimum and maximum grades, we just have a line saying off scale. Can I just double check what that means and if I've understood your introduction correctly?
Yeah, so off scale is something that happens when a post is paid outside of our set pay grades. And it tends to come about in situations, for example, where somebody's transferred into Cambridgeshire under a TUPE transfer, sort of a legal transfer into the county council, where their salary is then protected under the regulations that apply to their transfer. So it's something we avoid using wherever possible. But there are some situations where somebody's role hasn't fitted to our grade, but there'll be an explanation for that in terms of if it's a salary protection arrangement.
Councillor Coutts.
This is just an opportunity really probably for you to say yes, I think, but as a sort of semi-outsider here, it's clearly a nonsense if you're trying to get comparative data over the years to have a fixed sum element on the list. It's meaningless. So looking down the number of people in this scale, a third of them are in that first band over 50 to 55. Because when you've got a period of 10% inflation as we had last year, it's a useless statistic really. Is there any intention to do anything about that at government level?
I'm not aware that there's any moves to change that. I think it's pretty much a lot of people share that view that it becomes a little bit meaningless because it doesn't change and hasn't changed over time. So I suppose I am just saying yes.
Councillor Black.
Yes, well, my first time on having seen these things at the committee, and it's all very interesting to see these salaries. But it does strike me that essentially we're complying with some legislation here, which was really just introduced to give national tabloid journalists the chance to write an article and to sort of perhaps get a lurid headline about, well, what a lot of fat cats there are at local councils, and just a excuse for lazy journalism, really, without really looking behind this. But it's quite interesting to talk sometimes about high pay and whether there are people in the UK who are quite excessively rewarded for what they do, and indeed whether some of these people are getting their money from the public purse. And I've been on the council looking at quite a lot in adults and health, and of course a lot of the money we go is contracted out to private companies, and they actually do the business. So, for instance, I did quite a lot of research on a care home firm which had got an awful inadequate rating for the care they were giving to some of our people. And when you look at that firm, our council has a budget of something like £1,000 million, £1 billion. This firm has got about 30 care homes. It's quite a small affair compared to some of them. Only some of them in Cambridgeshire, of course. And the director owner of that firm has a £30 million yacht sitting in Marbella. He's thought to be worth about 100 million. And he lives in a manor house, which was where Michael Jackson was going to live before his final European tour with his entire entourage, a tour that didn't happen for obvious reasons. But that's the sort of level of accommodation he lives in. And if we're looking at where public money is wasted, I think there's probably other places we could look, because I doubt that any of our officers have £30 million yachts in Marbella. And even one of the really biggest care home companies in the country, if you look at Barchester or HC1, their director's remuneration is counted in millions, not in the amount here. Although the actual total turnover of one of those companies is less than the county council's budget. And I wouldn't actually compare their millions with our officers' remuneration, because that's only the half of it, because you see things like a 63 million management fee, which disappears to a company in the Cayman Islands. And I've no idea where it goes after that, because I can't see the accounts of the companies in the Cayman Islands. There's other companies that we contract that are registered in Jersey. And actually, there is no way of seeing the total of what the owners and the directors are extracting from these companies, much of which is actually funded from the public purse and intended to be looking after our old people and people who are vulnerable, people who are needing help. So, I think we do need to talk about excessive rewards for the elite in this country, but this is probably not the right place to absolutely start. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got a question because actually, although many of the aspects of this are constrained and sort of a given, and absolutely taking Councillor Coote's point that, you know, with a fixed baseline, obviously with inflation and so on, it is going to tick up and mean less and less. But there is something about the ratio of the chief executive salary to the median, and it has changed considerably. And I appreciate it is still within a benchmark, a peer authority. So it's, you know, it's not, as it were, anything to be concerned about, particularly on the face of it. But I just wondered what you felt actually contributed to the change, because going from 1 to 6.1 to 6.5 to 1 to 6.8 is not insignificant change, actually. And I wondered, is that to do with, well, I just wondered what it was to do with. Thank you.
So what underlies that is a change. Well, there's been a change to our median salary. So that's decreased. So we've seen the mean salary increase by £1,172 compared to the previous year. And then we've seen a decrease in the median salary, which is then used to create that ratio. In terms of the reason for that decrease in the median salary, that's not something that we've looked at in detail for this report, but that's where the change that underlies that change in the ratio has come from.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I think it would be good for the March meeting, assuming this is going to go forward to it. I think it might be helpful just to understand that a little bit, because I think that the chief executive's salary hasn't necessarily increased, and yet, I mean, and the key issue here is the median salary has decreased, and you know, this ratio is telling us what's happening with the median as well as what's happening with the chief executive. So we know what's happening with chief executive pay, but what is happening with the vast majority of people's salaries? So I think that would be good to have a you know, just some sort of sense of what the key driver is there. Yeah, thank you. Because, you know, we all are aware that pay has gone up, so in a way it doesn't totally tally. So thank you. Any other comments or questions? No? Oh.
Just to underline what you said there, really, it seems to me very surprising that our median salary has fallen in a time of inflation. So it would be interesting to see. It must be something to do with the makeup of the job profiles that are in there. Have we taken in-house some things which were previously contracted or something like that?
I suspect, and this is sort of speculating, that the change in our structure in terms of the senior structure with Peterborough might play into that, but I couldn't say for sure.
Yeah, no, I think the data is always just gives us an opportunity to get into what's going on. So that'd be really helpful. If anyone's got any other questions or points they would like to make, no. So can I ask, please, are we happy to support the recommendation that the transparency data and chief officers pay policy statement will go to the March full council? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. And now we move on to the next item, please, which is pay gap reporting. Would you like to introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, item 4 is another part of our requirements in terms of statutory reporting, and that is to review the pay gap publication to ensure compliance with the Equality Act 2010, specifically the Gender Pay Gap Information Regulations 2017, to note the analysis of both the gender and the ethnicity pay gaps, including actions taken to date and actions proposed. And the committee is asked two things, to recommend the pay gap full analysis report to full council in March for approval, and to recommend the pay gap publication to full council in March for approval and publication. So you have two appendices here. The second is the publications. That represents what we are required to publish, as well as the ethnicity data. And you'll see that publishing that is a choice that full council has made and committed to. And the first appendix there is the deeper analysis. That's primarily for our internal use in trying to understand and, as the chair said, get into some data to understand what we can then do to try and close those pay gaps. So the background there is that Equality Act legislation, where we're required to publish a number of calculations showing the difference between the average earnings of men and women in our council. So we're not talking in this sense about publishing individual employee data. And in line with the requirements of the legislation, we use calculations as at the 31st of March 2023. We do also publish information on our ethnicity pay gaps as well. And that was related to the full council meeting in 2021 and a motion there to support actions we could take to address racism. In terms of the gender pay gap, you will see that this is used to assess levels of equality, gender equality in the workplace and the balance of male and female employees at different levels in the council. Our mean gender pay gap is 10.09% this year, which is an increase from 8.8%, which we reported last year. This is the mean gender pay gap difference between the average hourly earnings of men and women. We also calculate and publish the median gender pay gap, and that has experienced a slight increase, reported at 8.38% compared to last year's figure of 8.2%, but it's below the previous year's figure, which was 8.6%. So that median figure is staying a little more steady. Median pay gap is the difference between the midpoints and the ranges of the hourly earnings of men and women, taking all salaries in the sample, lining them up in order and going for the middle salary there. We've highlighted here, because of that difference between the mean and the median, in terms of the mean has increased more than the median this year. We do see changes in the demography of the leadership pay scale this year, and those higher pay salaries will have an impact on the mean pay gap. We've noted that new appointments to the senior leadership team, which occurred following a period of change, Sarah's referenced some of that, were subject to full and open competition through the relevant organisational procedures. So actions that we are primarily looking at in terms of the difference there in our leadership cohort, things that we could do, you'll see in the action plan, will relate to supporting future career progression amongst our female cohort of managers, so that we ensure that people feel well positioned to enter and succeed in future leadership appointments. It's possible that the ethnicity pay gap reporting will become mandatory in future. It isn't at the moment, and we choose to report that. There are differences in terms of the ethnicity pay gap reporting, in terms of our ability to understand the reasons there, because we aren't just comparing two groups. We are looking at various different ethnicity groups there, and we don't know the ethnicity of all of our employees because people have a choice as to whether to disclose that or not. We have a mean ethnicity pay gap this year of 5.6%, which has increased from 3.1% last year, and the median has decreased from 6.2% to 5.8% this year. There, as I've said, there's still a number of colleagues whose ethnicity remains as unknown. That represents 32.4%. So we do have more work to do in encouraging our workforce to complete their diversity data on our employee information system, so that can support reporting accuracy. And we will continue to monitor and analyse that data to better understand the reasons behind the ethnicity gaps. We have set out in the deeper analysis paper the actions that we have taken, as well as some more specific analysis around things that could be contributing to the pay gaps, and some of our suggested actions that we'll be incorporating into either our EDI strategy action plan or the people strategy action plan. I have drawn out a few highlights of the deeper analysis, but if that's all right, I'll just pop through a few of those and then we can take some questions if there's other things. So we have looked more at pay quartiles. We've looked at the figures by directorate as well in terms of pay gap figures within each directorate. And really what the focus we think needs to be there is changing both the gender balance and the representation in leadership positions. So as I said earlier, looking at trying to encourage more females to progress into leadership positions. It's not so much about the ratio of males and females in the organisation, as you'll see in terms of the data over the past 6 years. We tend to stick around 79 or 80% female and 20-21% males. That's not really changing. So it's really about the balance of males and females within those pay grades that would have the greater impact there. You'll recall, colleagues who were at Staffing Appeals Committee in November, we talked about benchmarking, and we've looked at benchmarking against other councils in the past few months. That is based on the pay gap data that they have published. So that at the moment is 2022 data. Once every council has done what we're doing now and published their pay gap data for 2023, we can do a little bit more analysis on how we compare with other similar councils. So I don't have a further update on that one particularly today. Other things that we wanted to point out, bear with. We've also looked at part-time and full-time, and one element that we think we need to consider there around part-time working is whether perceptions of leadership roles may not fit with colleagues wanting to work part-time, or understanding whether there is a desire to support colleagues to transition back to full-time working and what might support that. We've also looked at appraisal process outcomes. So every year in January, we have the Our Ratings conversation where colleagues are eligible to be considered for pay progression. There's been an improved and a steady rating of males and females. So we believe that the introduction of ratings based on both behaviour and performance, whereas previously things were focused primarily on performance, has embedded, with the effect that female employees have been able to demonstrate higher ratings overall than previously. So there's some good outcomes of the actions around looking at how we rate colleagues. We have noted this time that our pay gap appears to increase with length of service. So we see a bigger pay gap in colleagues who have over 8 years of service. We've also looked this time at apprenticeships and the snapshot data of colleagues who are undertaking apprenticeships and some of the roles that people are undertaking there by gender. We therefore need to look at what we can do to attract more of each gender into respective positions. So some examples perhaps might be more males into care positions, more females into roles like surveying, and some examples of the work we've started doing is when we're looking at our work experience programme for this year with schools, and we're reaching out to schools, we want to make sure that services are being clear about the diversity of colleagues that work in their services, and trying to make sure that we therefore attract a diverse range of people to be interested in taking up work experience placements, apprenticeships, etc. We've also analysed career progression within the organisation, and there is some evidence from that progression to leadership into leadership roles by females in the organisation is improving, but it is a very small sample there. We're talking about 9 people, so we keep that in our action plan in terms of some of the particular actions we're proposing to understand how we can better support that progression in the organisation. I've noted the complexity, I think, already around the ethnicity pay reporting, because we are talking about more than 2 groups, and we are continuing to try and encourage colleagues to disclose their ethnicity so that we can undertake that analysis better with a fuller picture of our demography. We did talk to a couple of other comparator councils in terms of what they are doing to try and close their pay gaps. And what has come back from both of those conversations was the importance of correct and unbiased recruitment. I've noted in the report the importance of making sure managers are all trained on understanding about how to avoid bias in appointing salaries. Also, importance shown from other councils around accurate and transparent reporting and in-depth analysis of workforce demographics. We've highlighted some of the actions that we've taken over the past few years. Some of those include things like strengthening our coaching offer and looking at programmes specifically, for example, a Women of Colour in Leadership programme, improving training around compassionate and inclusive leadership and our 4 pillars of inclusion training that we are offering in the organisation, and a mutual mentoring pilot. We have then set out some proposed actions in line with our people strategy commitments. Some of those actions are part of the EDI strategy, but they are the workforce elements of that, so they link in very well. Here, I would probably just highlight to you what, in terms of what I've talked about in our leadership progression and trying to support that, what we'd like to do is set up a community of practice for current and aspiring female leaders within the organisation to understand what is already supporting progression within the organisation, and any understanding more about any barriers there are and how we might overcome those, as well as increasing the visibility of female senior leaders in our action plan to provide an opportunity for leaders to share their insights into what may have helped them reach their position. That's the end of what I was going to say, but I'm sure there'll be questions I'll be happy to take. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a rich picture of data. Who would like, I personally have quite a few questions, but who would like to say anything? No? Questions? Questions? Mike?
Yeah, just a quick point. Have we got any plans to look into the disability pay gap? So, I mean, that's another cause of concern. The only other little comment I made is that I'm surprised I haven't seen more about what the trade unions are saying about these issues, and that they're ones that they are very interested in, and I know they have a good deal of policy and suggestions and desire to be consulted. And you know, I'd have thought that through a document like this, I would see evidence of consultation and sort of what had been asked and what had been taken on board, you know, so that's a comment. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll have to take the question about the disability pay gap away and come back to you. In terms of our trade union input to this, you're quite right. They are interested in our pay gap data, and we do discuss that at our corporate joint panel when we are preparing the pay gap data, but also in terms of the actions around the EDI strategy and the people strategy. So I may not have got that through in this report, so it's helpful reflection, because we can make sure that we're a bit more specific about that next year, because this is certainly something that we do talk to our recognised trade unions about, and as you say, get some useful feedback from them to inform what their members might like to see us do. Thank you.
Right, any questions? If so, I'll start. I haven't got a sensible order in which to ask these questions, so bear with me. So can I just check that the time series is the same as for the previous report?
Sorry, in terms of the
time
the senior
period.
pay transparency.
Yeah.
So this is a snapshot at the 31st of March 2023. So it's just a point in time.
Okay. So what we had in the previous report was that what we learned in particular, or a standout fact, was that the median pay was down. And here we learned that the median pay gap is increased. And so one question is, what has contributed to the pay gap increasing? And if it is about senior roles, as I think you've alluded to, I mean, the senior roles are sort of quite unique and in a sense are potentially muddying the picture. If we looked at the workforce without the senior pay, what would we find? And do we really want to stick with the median pay, or do we need to look at mean to get a better idea of where the distribution is? Because actually, if we think of equal pay, which I know is not what we do, but I would like us to be able to look at equal pay because it is actually part of what our obligation, legal obligation is. That talks about equal value for roles, and then we can then make comparisons across the organisation. And you know, with all due respect to the senior team, in a sense, they're not part of that discussion. And the whole emphasis on leadership, etc., I think we're missing the picture underneath. For example, if by staying here longer, the pay gap is wider, that means that the promotion policy isn't necessarily working that well. So I guess, sorry, I'm just sort of put all my questions together. What has contributed to increasing the pay gap? And if it's all about the senior team disaggregating from Peterborough, can we actually understand what it would be if we did a like for like without the senior team and looked at just the body of staff? Secondly, why not equal pay? Thirdly, why not mean rather than median? Yeah, I think that's probably enough.
Thank you, Chair. So I've gone and just forgotten your first question, which I think was about why are we focusing on leadership? Sorry.
First question is really what's contributed to we've got a headline figure here of the median pay gap being between 8 and a bit and 10% increase, which is a really significant change backwards. And we also find out previously that the median pay has decreased. So these things are not stacking up. You know, I would like to understand why those figures are the case.
Yes, okay, thank you. So the mean has increased, the mean pay gap has increased from 8.8 to 10.09. So the most significant increase is in the mean pay gap in terms of gender. The median has increased slightly from last year, but is still lower than the previous year. So we've seen a much smaller increase in the median pay gap.
It's increased by 8.38%.
So the median pay gap in 2022
hourly pay
was
yeah.
8.2%, and the median pay gap in 2023 is 8.38%.
Yeah, that's still quite a significant increase. I mean, that's still a significant gap.
Significant, okay. So the reason that we were focusing, or I was focusing rather, on the leadership changes was to explain that larger increase in the mean from the 8.8 to the 10.09. But you are correct that there has been a slight increase from 8.2 to 8.38% in the median. What that is not reflective of, I suppose, is when we were looking at the transparency pay, that is the overall median pay for the organisation, not looking at gender breakdown, whereas this is the difference between males and females. When we look at the breakdown by pay scale, which is on, lost my page now, 14 of the more in-depth report, that much more significant gap is between the leadership pay scale, and the pay gaps in the P&M and the NJC grades are the smaller pay gaps. So looking at the headline figure of the mean being quite a bit more this time, that's where I was coming from in talking about progression into leadership. But you're absolutely right. All of the analysis through looking at part-time working, looking at pay progression within the organisation, looking at career progression within the organisation, those things are all really important. And I think we are doing more each year to try and look at that more complex picture, to say, how can our actions support the whole organisation, and improvement of representation in the pay scales at each point. Equal pay, I suppose we do take as a separate matter for these reporting purposes, because it isn't part of the statutory reporting for this committee, but we need to make sure that when we're looking at the people strategy, which we will do in Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee, that we are making sure that we are sticking to a pay policy that supports equality of pay between males and females, and indeed all of our other groups within the organisation. So I think we could look at that more in that committee.
I think that is really helpful, because the point is made very clearly about this not being about equal pay. This is about a pay gap, which is different. But I do think some of the parameters around, it's not a criticism, but I think some of the parameters around, or assumptions built into the reporting, can influence what, how it's presented. So I think, when we look at this, there's one piece which is about senior pay, that's fine. And there's another piece which is about what is happening across the hundreds of staff that we have, and each one of them is as important as the senior. So we really want to make sure that they have proper equal pay, I think, for across the board. Do you want to say something, Sue?
Just to endorse that, I think that's a really important point, and it's very helpful to have, therefore, everything broken down by quartile, so that you can see the difference in each of those quartiles, and also understand the nuances within those quartiles. So I think what we need to ensure, as we've presented actions to you today about what we're intending to do from this point and going forward, is that those actions comprehensively cover each of those quartiles and the issues arising from each of those quartiles, and that we're not just looking at the top quartile and focusing on the issue of leadership, which of course is important and it emerges through this, but it's not the only issue to emerge. So I just wanted to endorse that point, and I think that's really helpful, and it's a good thing for us to go back and just double check in the actions that we take forward, in the way that Anna's described, that it is comprehensive across all the pay grades. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or points? Piers.
I'd just like to echo that. Thanks there. I love data, and to see data and the work that's gone into it is great. You may have explained this and I missed this, and it is only just an odd little thing which pops up there, but I'm fascinated to know that the biggest gender pay gap is amongst those who prefer not to state their ethnicity, and I'm just trying to work out why on earth that should be the case. The difference is significant. It isn't of any great importance, but I just think, well, a difference like that is odd. This is on page 46.
It is indeed very interesting, and that challenge of supporting colleagues to feel that they can share their ethnicity with us is something that we continue to work on, and forms a really important part of both action plans, because we don't necessarily know why people prefer not to say, and we don't know the ethnicity of colleagues who prefer not to say, and whether that's they think, well, there isn't a need for you to know that, or there's something else going on. And we try and work with colleagues in the organisation, including our employee networks, to make sure that we're creating an organisation in which people feel that they can share that with us. And part of that will be explaining how we use that, including in this kind of reporting, so we can say it will inform actions that we take to try and make things fairer.
Thank you. I think you're just agreeing really that it's odd, but it is a significant number of people. It's not a small sample, and it's a very significant difference. So, as you say, something else is going on there, I think.
And can I also ask, in terms of sort of being linked with performance of a department, have you made those links between outcomes, for example? I mean, outcomes of sort of management decisions, which is people's promotion and pay and so on, the sort of pay gap, and like overall performance or assessment of performance of that department. Are there correlations possible? Because quite often when you do look at departments in other organizations, poor management practices affect every aspect of the business. It's not just that you have poor management practices and staff are unhappy or there are complaints. There'll be more sick days, there'll be more complaints, there'll be pay gap. There'll be also really poor outcomes in terms of the business, the core business, whatever it is. So just wondered if there was any sort of potential for linking it up with other KPIs effectively.
I think there is potential, yes.
Thank you, well said. Appreciate it.
And just to say on that point, then some of the KPIs that certainly come through, the corporate KPIs that come through to strategy, resources and performance, do pick up the performance across the issues such as absence and reasons for absence and turnover, and also the exit interviews, so that getting that holistic picture as to kind of where the workforce is at, where our statistics are in relation to the workforce, and then how all of these things interrelate and what that's saying to us is again a really important point. And whilst not all of that information is clearly contained in this report, then those other KPIs which get reported through to strategy, resources and performance start to paint some of that picture. And then obviously it's about taking that away and scrutinising it in the way you've described. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for sort of indulging my questions, but that's really helpful. And like others have said, it is terrific to have this data set together, to present it. It gives us a real opportunity to dig in and understand a little bit more about what's going on with the organisation. It's really appreciated. I know it's really hard work to put it together. So unless we have any other comments or questions, we are asked to recommend the analysis report and to the report and the pay gap publication to go to full council and be published. Is everyone happy to do that? Thank you very much. That is done. And I believe that concludes our business today. Oh, Mike.
Yes, yeah, sorry, just to finish off again, apologies, it's my first term of these committees. Most of the committees I'm on seem to have an agenda plan that they look at this size time. And of course, they've also got a date of next meeting. And although our meetings are mostly ad hoc, like for appointments and things, and of course there's the appeals if you do any appeals, but it does seem to me that with this meeting, we know we're going to have every year at the same time. And I think we have one other that we do on a pretty much statutory basis that we have to do. And it does strike me as strange that these are not in the great big grid of all the committee meetings, and that they could be arranged a year in advance or whatever, and that would be helpful, because I'm finding these things coming up, as a surprise. You've got all these dates there, but they might be, certainly for the service appeals, and then they never happen. But really, we do know that we're going to have these two. And about the agenda plan, there's in the constitution, there's quite a few things that staffing looks after, as well as the things that we have to do on a statutory basis. For instance, it strikes me that perhaps it's a little surprising that we haven't had any sort of follow-up at this meeting from the sort of staffing report that we discussed at council in May. So we presumably there's more work going on that. The survey that we put through. And I mean, what I'd like to suggest is that we have an idea of when our next meeting is. Presumably we do need one in the autumn, and perhaps a date that members could suggest agenda items for as well. And that there's quite a few things within the constitution, this committee, that we might want to discuss, and that, perhaps we could have that opportunity to bring things forward.
Thank you. And I believe that one reason why we are a little bit flexible about dates is that we sometimes combine this meeting with an active recruitment exercise, and they, be shame to kind of mix them up. But certainly I think we should look at those points if members are happy to do that, because we can at least have a provisional date for the meetings that we know we're going to have, and if we do have to change them, we have to change them, but we can at least have a sort of mark in the sand. I agree with that. And an agenda plan would be interesting to discuss what items could be in there now that we've got through we've had a really major exercise of essentially recruiting the senior team. So that has been a lot of work for this committee at multiple points during the year. So if we can take that away, I'd be very happy to discuss that in future. So thank you very much. Unless there's anything else, thank you very much for attending. Thank you for all the work, and see you next time.